UCSD. We have Stephen Filippo and Delong Wang. And yeah, they just arrived this morning and got a short tour of our CCRMA building. And now we're going to listen from, about their music a little bit and work. And Stephen is going to start first. Then we'll have Delong, and then we'll have delicious food from Zareen's, catered around 7 p.m. And until then, if you're hungry, we have some tasty chocolate almonds. I'm going to pass them around here for no specific reason. And I don't think we have anyone in Zoom today, so I'm not going to say hello to anyone. But we are going to record just in case. And yeah, please give a warm welcome to Stephen and Delong.
Hi everyone, it's nice to see you all. I'm sure I'll meet you all at some capacity afterwards. But yeah, I thank you all for letting me come here and speak about what I've been doing and what I've been making and about my creative practice. My name's Stephen. I work in music. I compose and create, I guess, sound works, particularly often like electroacoustic music, so music that has, I guess, an instrumental focus, but then the instrument is either modified or processed or is set along some kind of other media, be it video media or fixed audio or what have you. I am originally from Australia, from the West Coast, which is one of the most isolated regions globally, from a very small area. And I guess my life changed quite profoundly about 7 years ago when I had the opportunity to move to the United States to pursue my PhD at UCSD in music composition. Which I guess I can give you a bit of a background. I studied music in Western Australia at a kind of research conservatorium. I sort of floated around between studying anthropology and social sciences, and then eventually found my way into music composition as a way to learn music theory originally. But then through that experience, I learned about I guess, modernist and postmodern classical music making, and then that suddenly became an avenue of creating, I guess. Originally just, music for the people that was around me as a way to interact with them and engage with them. But then suddenly things spiraled out and I was asked if I would move to the United States, and lo and behold, I'm here. So I work in music composition, electroacoustic music composition, and then I also engage with some sociological-based research as well. In 2023, I was a research fellow at Harvard University at their music department, supported by a very small institute, the Institute of Australian Studies. Who would have thought such a thing would exist in Boston? Where I undertook a research project that looked at specific pieces of Australian repertoire, the big Australian pieces, not that you would necessarily know them, and looked at them through this lens that we call cultural cringe, which is a very colonial specific feeling of anxiety based on one's colonial nation-state status. So what I mean by that is that Australian music inherently is interpreted as inferior because Britain exists as the colonial force, right? So everything that comes out of that, the colonies of Britain, especially a penal colony culture, is inherently inferior because of that history. And a way that many historically Australian composers have responded to that is by undertaking quite precise nationalistic creative pursuits by trying to create music that is ultra Australian. And that leads into this artistic poetic movement called the Jindi Warabak movement, which kind of came around in the 1940s. It was a concise nationalistic movement that used archival material about Indigenous people, recordings of Indigenous people, transcriptions of Indigenous music, and tried synthesizing that into Western European traditions to create something that served the nation-state purpose of culture building in Australia. So obviously we can look at that as like obviously an appropriative act. But what I say is that much of this comes out of this feeling of anxiety and feeling the need to prove oneself. And I looked at these composers who take their pilgrimage to the UK and to the US. And then I consider myself who's recapitulating that same venture and question the whole thing. But as a side of that, I also write music. And over the few years that I've been getting further into electroacoustic music, which before I came to the US, I was just writing classical-based music for acoustic ensembles, albeit usually strange ensemble makeups. But since moving to the US, I've tried to take more seriously the practice of recording sound to use within experimental music performances, particularly like real world field recorded sound, and questioning like how I engage with that with authenticity and respect to the resources and the place and etc. So there's been an evolution. But I want to start with a piece of music that I wrote a few years ago called Spectral Breathing Apparatus. I've got a QR code up here if you want to like get the score up and follow along to some capacity. It's available. But essentially this piece is a work for solo woodwind instrument with the removal of the mouthpiece or reed. This was originally performed by Neve Dell, who is one of my collaborators, and she's also the oboist in Ensemble Love Music, which is a Strasbourg-based group. And this was performed in a few festivals and has now been primarily exhibited in arts media festival context as opposed to live performance. It's been more transitioned into a video art kind of piece. So in this work, the performer, in this case the oboist Neve, performs into the instrument with the absence of the mouthpiece, with the absence of the reed. And by doing this, we're challenging the conventional sound production of the instrument, right? If the reed is gone, suddenly we have to consider a new palette of sounds or a new set of sounds that we can use to supplement the normal habitus of the oboe. And this transforms the instrument into a kind of unvoiced apparatus, right? So this piece consists of kind of vocalizers, these hisses, these whistling sounds, clicks, vocalized air sounds, and these are either amplified or processed electronically to create a kind of immersive sonic landscape that she exists in. So various whistles and plosive kind of articulations emphasize the embouchure as a generative rather than restrictive component of sound making. So the performance experiences a kind of destabilization of their musical identity in performing this work. Without the reed, traditional concerns such as the tone quality and articulation become irrelevant or undermined. And instead, the performer assesses sounds based on aesthetic interest rather than conventional woodwind or oboe ideals. So this extends to the bodily presence. Suddenly, with the absence of the reed, what becomes central of the focus is the mouth, because it's no longer hidden behind anything. And what this piece explores is this honing in on the mouth, on Neve's mouth as a sound-making source, and then using the oboe as something that either the sound goes through or against, and these sounds are then processed. So conceptually, the piece tries to unvoice the oboe. It's stripping it of its like traditional timbral identities whilst simultaneously voicing the body behind the oboe, the instrument that doesn't get forefronted. The musician can't hide behind the oboe anymore. Suddenly, the oboe is almost to some extent, an unnecessary prop, right? Because the central focus is on the mouth, or the oboe is interfering with the production of these kind of mouth sounds. So we're subverting standard understandings of like instrumental musicianship, and we're replacing the oboist's usual pursuit of the refined tone with raw and unpredictable and sometimes unrefined sound making. So this performance that we'll watch in a moment oscillates between this idea of like loss and liberation. The absence of the reed induces a sense of disorientation for the performer, yet it also enables this kind of novel form of musical expressivity that we wouldn't otherwise have. And then filming the piece as opposed to the live experience, but having a video version that then focuses in intimately on her mouth gives us this proximity then to the performer that we wouldn't get in a live experience. This is why this piece has more often been performed in film festivals or performing media festivals, though it has been performed live a few times as well. So ultimately, the piece is resisting instrumental boundaries, conventional instrumental boundaries, by offering a radical imagining of what wind performance that embraces bodily vulnerability and sonic exploration could be. So I want to play this. It's about a 12-minute excerpt or edited version of it, which has been stripped down, so the score that you have is a slightly more extended version. But you will see some of the symbology that's happened that has to be created in the score. You can see, first and foremost, the separation of the mouth and fingers as two different elements of the performance, and also descriptive text or technique text that give life to some of these sounds or give prompts for Neve to perform some of these sounds. And again, out of this, I'll then explain like how the recording process and how the approach to the material recordings then developed after. So let's play this. Are there any thoughts or questions at this point? Or I can just continue talking. You at the back?
It's my sense that some of that was tape.
Yes.
Right? How do you, I guess, compose for the, not just the dialogue between instrumental performance and electronic processing?
Yes.
The live processing and the tape processing?
Yeah, I think my way of navigating that was through, again, in the score, just having every musical gesture be its like its own cell of timed duration, right? So she then affixes herself to certain markers either within the tape or a preset kind of DSP change or alteration. So she has quite like precise boundary units of time that she has to exist within. However, the material within, let's say, a very specific 26.37 seconds, which is like a crazy precise point, there's some flexibility in it. Like in this third bar of the top system here, we have this kind of breathing in and out gesture that goes on for 12 seconds, and then this like upwards breathing gesture. So everything is like quite precisely mapped out as so far as like where her beats are. And then the things that happen within there are open to the relative of chance. Does that answer your question? Yeah, what was your name?
Zach.
Zach. Thanks, Zach. Any others? No. Okay. So I created this in 2022, which is some time ago now. And I remember afterwards, after this was presented and after I finished up the fellowship at Harvard, I found myself, for lack of a better term, quite burnt out or quite overwhelmed. And I also sat on quite a significant pot of leftover grant money. Nice for me. So like any working class person that suddenly finds himself with a lot of money, I blew it on a holiday and went to Southeast Asia for a few months. And here I devised a project for myself whereby I would take this train journey from the northernmost point of Thailand all the way down through to Malaysia. And I bought this contact microphone that I affixed to the interiors of the trains that I was riding or the ferries that I was riding on this journey, which I sort of mapped out, I guess, the key beat locations, to capture this sound, this drone of travel, this constant kind of like sound of movement that happens when one is in the throes of travel, right? So in this case, the interior section of like a train compartment, or here like the outer border of like a ferry, to pick up the sound of the material moving and to try and get this sound of what I would call the sound of travel. Here's like another clip where I'm in like a very tight train compartment and there would be like a microphone up here and like a secondary one here as I'm like riding the sleeper train that night and just capture this. And then I paired that with this collaboration I did with violinist Sarah Saviet, where she, on the violin, then embeds herself into the texture of travel. So she, like with the oboe, is kind of stripped from this sort of usual normative sound, this like virtuosic component that we might know about violin performance, and she just embeds herself into this as like another drone element. So this piece has Sarah performing, but then also a video component. And I think it's like 5/1, so there's some spatialization of sounds. But it's a 20-minute long piece, so I'll just show like a couple small clips of it before I move on to this next project that I've been working on. But what I liked about this is that it was documenting a hands-on experience that I was having in that moment. I was taking recordings of this lived experience of traveling, of movement, and putting it and aestheticizing it into a work. And I found myself in that moment feeling very connected to the sounds themselves, because these sounds came from my experience of place, my experience of being there, or my experience of the journey. So here's just like a small example where she is, where we can hear the train. This is a live recording as well, so it's a bit diminished. But the train sound is constantly present, and she is within the space, either grinding or bowing, which is then amplified as well to meet the level. And then at the end, we finally get to a kind of destination where we reach this temple that I went to, and in the stupa, it's like a 360 stainless steel meshing with tiny bells inside. So then suddenly she's performing in the bellscape. And what remains after, and she's performing this piece entirely on the G string for the duration, for the 23 minutes. And at the very end, she's at the contact point between the tuning peg and the end of the string, making a similar pitch sound that is meant to then mix in with the sound of the bells itself. So we then recorded this in the studio and released this as an EP that documents all the sounds of the various legs of the journey between this destination and this destination, like Chiang Mai to Bangkok, Bangkok to Prachuap, Prachuap, so on and so on. And then the first piece is the violin performance of it, using these materials to then create it. And what I liked about this as like an album is that not only it has the documentary component, but then it also has like the aestheticized and kind of product. So in my most recent work in November, I was artist in residence at Monson Arts, which is like an arts residency in rural Maine. And I propositioned to the organization that I would spend a month living in this very small town, recording different contact points of the lake that the town is built upon. Like the lake not only has this like natural basis, but it also like feeds the economy of the town. It's where the slate manufacturing comes out of. It's where the fishing industry is. So there's a lot of intersection between like natural environment and human ecology working together. And what I propositioned is that I would create a map of all the different locations that I recorded as a way of documenting this. So what I created was if anyone's used the software ArcGIS, which is like a spatialized mapping software, I created this form of field work and documentation of all of these recordings that intertwines field notes of the experience of the place. I also took poetry workshops in epistolary poetry, so I was writing a lot of letters as poems that were then built into it, as well as the recorded materials themselves and video materials. So it's done as like a continuous kind of scrolling website where you get some information about myself, and then information about the location, and then finally the map itself, where we have these different locations marked, and we can zoom into one, let's say the sound of the quarry, the slate quarry that the town was built upon, and the recordings that I took there, as well as like documentation of the space, how I interacted with the space, how I felt about it, just as a way to show that I'm not just a figure that is like taking sound from its environment, but it's documenting how I experienced that place and understood it from a first-hand experience. So there's different bits of writing, extracts of like poetic works, and then field recordings intertwined in there, as well as some archival research. So here we can hear like the sounds of the slate itself, which was captured as a recording. Or we can go listen to recordings of the water, where if I go out to this one, the footage of myself in the center of the lake recording it. If I scroll down a bit to something, sorry, there's so many entries. Something here where I'm like literally in the middle of the lake on a canoe with like a field recorder trying to capture a sound. So in this one, you get the sound of like the canoe on the lake, so my human presence in the environment, as well as the distant sound of chainsawing of the local forests and the sound of the water as well. So all of these artifacts are put into this like database, into this website that's like part documentation, that's part journaling, that's part poetry, that's part field notes, that also has the recordings. And as well as other parts, as well as like the official recordings themselves, there was also like other artifacts that I may have found, such as such as the election night where I went to like this rural Maine bar and wrote about my experience there, where the owner of the bar came out and made everyone sing the national anthem and salute this mural of the flag. Or I also digitized some VHS tapes that I found in the abandoned slate quarries just to show like what information was on there. So really just trying to give my all to the environment, trying to collect as much and trying to engage with it and feel it as a mode that then will eventually get turned into a new composition for percussion with transducers and interactive media elements, video, live processing, etc., etc. But this is like the documentarian beginning of like where these sounds come from, and then the next step is to then create music from it. So the progression is that the further I embed myself into the sounds themselves, the further that I consider them, I feel the stronger the projects are becoming and more considered. So hopefully, now that I'm going to the most extreme end, hopefully something magical might come out of it. Maybe. And I'm also just trying to proposition that like engaging with the site, engaging with the environment, as opposed to just taking and like being in it, is a core part of the art making process itself. The material gathering, even though material is probably like not the most appropriate word to use because it feels very like generative for the sake of generative, but the gathering and being in the space informs me and gives me the information and gives me the impetus to then turn it into a creative work, to turn it into a musical composition for instrument. And that's how my practice of engaging with quote unquote material, or engaging with recorded sound and putting them into live performance settings has been evolving, at least in the last 2 years. So this is available as like a map that anyone can like look through if they want. Doesn't necessarily like need to, but it's again trying to create a map that has a lot of personal emphasis to it, as well as like, if we go back to it, all the markers are numbered based on like when I attended, right? So we're kind of undermining some of the conventions of normal mapping because it's a personal map. It's a map that documents my experience and chronologizes my interaction with that space, as opposed to being used for like a wider informational purpose. But the information is still in there and the experience is still in there. So then this is also available as an album as well. So it would have the 3 modes: the album, the interactive map, and then the percussion work that comes out of it. Yeah, and that's where I'm at. Thank you. I'm happy to respond to any thoughts or queries or questions, even if they don't feel fully formed. I'll still give it my all.
These last 2 things that you've shown us feel really like based in almost kind of sonic storytelling.
Yeah.
And I was just wondering if that influenced at all when you were writing the first piece that you showed us. If there's some storytelling elements of it.
Yeah, I mean, for the first piece, I wanted to have this progression from quite noise-centric sounds, especially with the mouth, into something where it feels like she was almost a part of an environmental space that hints at some elements of realism, but then also has effects on it to kind of, to make it a bit unreal, right? But the idea of like environmental storytelling is definitely in like a nascent form there. And now it's the more commitment I give to the sound resources itself, the further I feel like I'm developing the means to create those imagined spaces. Yeah.
Actually, I have a similar question as far as like using the last two pieces to ask a question about the first. So the last two also have this documentary aspect.
Yes.
And I was wondering if there was an element, for example, of the way that you collaborated with the oboe player that was sort of, and that the composition was coming out of a kind of documentation of that process at all. How was it? What was your collaborative work like?
Yeah, well, my background is in classical voice, so that's my instrument. And I always had this issue where I felt like the music that I was singing or performing wasn't like aligning with the music that I was writing. So I started experimenting more with just like noise making through the mouth. I had an older brother when I was young that I used to annoy through making very wet mouth noises. So I really wanted to like forefront those and really commit to them as musical gestures. So this was written like after around COVID time, and we would send each other, I guess, audio clips of us making these sounds back and forth. First me explaining how I made them, like, you know, continuously suck through your teeth, which is like a sound that's like underpins a lot of it. This, and trying to figure out ways to sustain that. But it was also coincidental that she was performing this Aaron Cassidy work that also required the mouthpiece removed. So there was an awareness of someone else approaching the same instrument with the same removal of convention. So I guess I was also able to like depart from what had already been done as well.
Yeah, and also it's a really nice thing because you can tell that like if she performed an Aaron Cassidy piece, she would have a kind of ease with the way you'd set up the score.
Yeah.
Like it's a sort of it's almost a culture in itself where you can go quite deep if there's the convention of separating the mouth and the hands, for example.
Yeah.
It felt like she really sort of incorporated that.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
And I think there's also like a sort of interesting component of it where you could proposition someone playing a different instrument, like a clarinet, to perform the same work, where the bore hole is suddenly bigger. Or in Florida, we performed it on the flute. And that had like a completely different feeling. But what I like about the recording of this one is that you get that proximity, and sometimes that's quite confrontational. I've had responses to this where people have felt uncomfortable, or that I may have like coerced Neve into doing this because she feels at times a bit sexualized, especially when it's like this kind of semi-phallic object that she's like hitting against her mouth. But she's not an unwitting participant to the piece. She's giving those performance elements to it. And being close to the mouth, hearing the wetness of saliva is a core part of it. And the only way you get that proximity to someone, that close to their face, is usually in like a romantic situation, right? Which maybe is where that conflation of like uncomfortability and feeling comes from as well. Yeah. Anyone else? Well, you can all come up and speak to me afterwards, and I would happily meet and speak to all of you. But again, thank you for listening. If you want to listen to those pieces in full, they're available on my website or on YouTube. Or if you want the link to the map, that's also on my website. And I can also email them if you'd like. But again, thank you so much for having me and for looking at my work and interacting.